Morning. How are we doing? Right, we are back in Joshua. So you've had a week off with your site meetings, and we're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 5, not just randomly. Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 to 6, chapter 5. So if you want to grab your Bibles or follow it on the screen behind me, please feel free. I'm just going to read it all out. So, chapter 5, verse 13. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Make 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, make the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So we're going to be looking at this morning at 3 different things that God says in this passage. But I think it's good for us to have a bit of a reminder, a bit of context, because, we've had a week off, Joshua. We've completely forgotten what we were talking about. So the Israelites now, they are in the promised land. They've come out of Egypt, and we've seen them cross the Jordan. The Jordan is separated, and the people of Israel have walked into the promised land. And there seems to be this bookend to the Exodus, where people of Israel have walked through the Red Sea, with it separated, and then they've walked into the promised land through the Jordan. And so the manna has stopped. The manna from heaven that fed them has stopped, and bad news for them, their sandals have now started wearing out. All those miraculous provisions that God was giving them in the wilderness have stopped because they are in the promised land. They are living off the land, and so their way of life has changed. They're now searching for food around them in the wider area. They may settle down as well. Also, the people of Israel, they are a military force. They are coming into a land that they will be claiming as their own. They will be removing people from that land too. And it's not like the people of Israel are a standing army. It's not they are a professional army. In history, that didn't happen to a couple of millennia later, actually. In this society, in this culture, it is every farmer was a warrior and every warrior was a farmer. Everybody took up arms because this is the people together going into what God has promised them. And so, in this step into the promised land, they encountered Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world. It is walled, the gates are barred, and the people of God are walking by faith. This is illustrated actually by what Charty spoke to us about the other week, when Joshua circumcised all the fighting men. In terms of military strategy, as an invading force, incapacitating all of your fighting men isn't usually the recommended step 1, shall we say. So this is a faith move. And so we get to this point where Joshua is stood before Jericho. And I don't know what he was doing. I don't know if he was going on a stroll. I don't know if it's a Joshua's brainstorming session. How are we going to conquer Jericho. But he looks up, from looking down, looks up, and he sees a man there with a drawn sword. That is a fairly hostile stance. You don't have your sword out of its sheath or scabbard unless you're planning to do something with it. Joshua, I think rather bravely, I'm not sure it'd be what I would do. Joshua walks up to him and asks him a question. Are you for us or for our enemies? Joshua takes a brave step. He speaks to the man with the sword out and asks that question. And from there, we're going to look at three different things that God speaks to Joshua in that moment. And so the first one is the response to that question. Are you for us or for our enemies? No, or neither, depending on which translation. Basically, you've asked the wrong question. The answer's no. Are you for us or against us? Neither. You see, in Old Testament times, there was a sense that different deities and different gods had different restrictions. So those restrictions might be that that particular god is God of only one people, or that god is only effective in the forests or in the mountains or on the plains. They have restrictions. And we can see that in 1 Kings 20, verse 28. If you want a reference, that the people thought that actually God was only a god of the mountains, so God goes, I'm going to give you a victory on the plains. Let's show that actually Yahweh, the God of Israel, is God over all things. And that is what we see here. Joshua's questioning, are you for us or for them? God goes, no. Because he is God over all things. He is God over all people. And so we have the Bible and we see redemption history. We see God at work in Israel. We see Jesus coming. But that doesn't mean God was only at work in Israel. God has always been the God of all. And so the Israelites are coming into the promised land, and they're coming into the promised land because God has rightly judged the people who lived in that land. Their sin against him has gotten to the point where God has said they are to be removed from the land and Israel to be brought in. Yahweh is not just the God of Israel. He has been working in all peoples, over all of the earth, over the whole world. And so the question is, it's not about, is God on one side or on the other? But the reality is, and the question is really, are Israel and Joshua on God's side? Are they following God? Because it's not just about that one nation. In fact, we see it now actually in the church. We see this rich tapestry of all nations knit together. And over the years, Christendom's had a little bit of an issue with this. I think we see it when Christianity became the religion of Rome. It became part of an empire, and the Roman view was that we are the chosen people. We are like the new Israel because with our empire, the word is going out. And that became their focus. Let's be honest, England's fairly guilty of this historically. We have been guilty and quoted often in certainly the Middle Ages and onwards that we have been like a new Israel, new chosen people. We'll have an empire, we'll spread the word. And, dare I say it, modern America can be a bit like this. We've had an election. There's been a lot of talk about it. They are the West's last Christian nation. We can focus on them. And that would be wrong. Because God's focus isn't just about one nation. And if we think like that, we miss the point. Because through Jesus, The gates have been opened to all. The church is a multicultural, vibrant people who have been brought together because of the work of Jesus. So no longer do we focus on one nation being the hope of the world or God at work just in one people. God is at work in his church. In 1 Peter 2:9, I'll turn there. Peter 2 verse 9 says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." The work of Jesus has brought about the church. It has been opened up to all people, and it's beautiful. So from a national to a personal level, it's not about God being on board with our plans. It's about us being on board with him. And when I've started thinking about that in preparation, how often do I get frustrated in life? How often have I been frustrated in life because God's not doing what I want him to do? I've got a plan. I've decided things should work this way, and it's not. And how annoyed and frustrated can we get because God's not done what I want him to do? And that's when I realize I've got my perspective wrong. God isn't an addition that I make. Actually, I want this lifestyle. And you know what? I think religion and spirituality is going to be a great addition to how I live my life. So I'm going to tack that on. It's like an app for my life. I have the God app downloaded, and I'll use that every now and then. Actually, it's about me being on board with God and his plan. And even thinking about this as well, how do we view church life? Because being part of a church can be a little bit frustrating at times, can't it? We get passionate about the church, and that's great, but all of us can be passionate about the church, and all of us can think and feel different things, and we can rub up against one another. It can get frustrating. It can be hurtful. How do we view church life? Do we submit it to God? Are we on board with him and his plan? Or do we want our own way? Now, a few weeks ago, I had the real joy of being asked to talk to the kids at Kids Life. And I loved it, frankly. It was great fun. And what I was asked to speak on for 10 minutes was Matthew 13, verse 44. And we'll turn there now. Matthew 13, verse 44. And it is the parable of the hidden treasure. I'll just read it. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Now, kids, if you were at Kids Life, you are going to remember this illustration, so I'm going to need your help and a bit of shouting. Grown-ups, you also, I'm expecting and hoping for some shouting too, so you're participating in this. So I said to the kids, imagine you had one sweet. And if you are struggling to picture a sweet, a picture of sweets will appear behind me. And there you go, just to spark the imagination. You have your one sweet. If you imagine it, you've got that one sweet. And I say to you, I will give you 0 sweets for your one sweet. Exactly. That is not a good deal. We're teaching them value here. I am now in possession of 1 billion sweets, to put a number on it. I will swap you 1 billion sweets for your one sweet. Is it a good deal? Yes, yes. Excellent. That is a sweet deal. Yeah. You should have seen how hard my wife rolled her eyes when I ran that one. It's a terrible dad joke, but it was worth it. Anyhow, that bargain is worth it. 1 billion sweets for one. We look at the parable of the hidden treasure. And what we see, someone finds treasure in a field and he knows the worth of it. He sees how valuable this treasure is. And so what does he go? What does he give in order to gain that treasure? Everything. Absolutely everything. He sells everything he has. And so for us, the kingdom of heaven, it's so much more. It is worth so much. It is 1 billion sweets. What does it take in order to get that? Not much. Just everything. Just your whole life. And so when we see Joshua asking, are you for us or against us? And the answer is no. Because the question should be, are we sold out for God? Are we following him? Are we on his side? And that's a challenge. It's not something we talk about lightly. Your whole life for God, we will find that we will war against that. It's so much easier to go, well, I'm just going to do what I want and then pay lip service. But by grace, by following him, we submit to God. It means for us, our views are challenged. We submit to the word. It means we be part of a church and part of a people, even when it hurts, even when it's hard. It means we follow him, not just in good times, but in hard times as well. We cling to him. We're shaped by him. And it's his amazing grace that has won us our salvation. It's that amazing grace that has brought us into this. It's that amazing grace that gives us that treasure and that value. So that's no and neither. The second thing we're going to look at, holy ground. So in chapter 5 of Joshua, verse 14, neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, what message does my Lord have for his servant? The commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now, in this particular bit, theologians generally have a bit of an argument about whether this is something called a theophany. This is the pre-incarnate Christ. This is Jesus appearing before he was born as a man, before the incarnation. And what we see here, we see the command to Joshua to take off your sandals, take off your shoes. Now, those of you with biblical knowledge may remember another part of the Old Testament where someone's told to take off their sandals. Anyone want to hazard a guess? Yes, Moses, straight away. Before the burning bush, Moses was told, take off your sandals because you are on holy ground. Now, what makes ground holy? Holy ground is obviously set apart. In every culture, I'd say, there is holy ground. And so, having a think about this, what is the holy ground of our culture? What is set apart? And my punt, my guess, was I would say probably national parks. And I'll have a lovely picture demonstrating a national park. This is holy ground to us. We're a secular society. Why is this? Well, it's beautiful, isn't it? We're preserving nature. We're getting back to how it was before we touched things and broke things. Very, very Jean-Jacques Rousseau, if you're into that kind of thing. It is what we think of as ground that is set apart. It's got special rules. You can't just build anything in the middle of it. You've got to have all the application forms. You will be constantly thwarted if you try and do anything, as those of you who live in a national park know. Other cultures and societies, they have different holy ground, as it were. There'll be temples or religious things. But here, what makes this ground holy? It's the presence of God. Why does Joshua have to take off his shoes? Because he is in the presence of Yahweh. And why remove the sandals? Why is that what you have to do? Well, firstly, it's a sign of reverence and respect. If you were to go into someone's house and have mud on your shoes, at the very least, you take it off at the door because as a sign of respect to them, you don't go traipsing dirt all through the house. Shoes off. It's respectful. And here, there's a sense of you don't want to go traipsing dirt all through it. Get them off. But it's also a sign of humility. Joshua has just come across a bloke with a sword out. And this guy said, take your shoes off. Okay? You're not going to be running away on hot, gravelly ground without your shoes on. It's a sign of humility saying, I'm not going anywhere. I'm before you. You are in charge. You have the power. And so for us, that is to be our position before God. In the presence of Him, we're to be humble. We have respect for Him. And the reality is, we can't get away. Psalm 139 will talk about how, where can we go? Because God, you're always there. But especially for us in the church as well. We are His people. And we come before Him. And in fact, God is within us. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19. Paul says this, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your bodies. There's a sense of God being in us, of God being present. And so for us, we want to take off that dirt. There is a call to holiness. Remove the sandals. Consecrate yourself. For us, if we are sinning, if we are aware of stuff that we're doing that's wrong, the call to us is take it off. Remove it. God gives us that power by His grace. We can now do what once we couldn't. There was a time when we were slaves to sin. That's not true anymore because of what Jesus has done. When we come before Him on that holy ground, it's not a building. This place isn't holy ground. God is at work in you if you believe in Him. You're a temple to Him. And so we take sin seriously. We take holiness seriously. Thomas Watson, the Puritan, said, "Holiness is not a burden, but a blessing." And it is. It's not just a case about not doing things. Actually, living in a repentant way, stepping aside from sin, it's a blessing. So we've looked at no/neither. We've looked at holy ground. And so finally, we're going to look at see. So from chapter 6, verse 1 of Joshua. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went in, and no one went out, and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." Now, it's only when you start actually getting into that verse, you can skim over things quite quickly. The narrator, whoever wrote this, in chapter 6, verse 1, goes, "The gates of Jericho are barred. It's a walled city. It's locked up. No one's going in and out." How does Joshua take Jericho? This is a huge task. How do the Israelites do it? This huge, imposing city before them, and God goes, "See, I've delivered it into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." Reality, looking at the city, and actually what God is saying looks very different. It is a call to faith for Joshua and the Israelites. God is proclaiming what he's going to do. I don't know about you, but I have a go-to daydream, right? Things are a bit boring. I have a go-to daydream, and that daydream is renovating a French chateau. I love it. Okay, so this is like, you get a bit of time on Instagram, all the different accounts of ruined chateaus, and Lindsay gets, unfortunately for her, bombarded by them. Look at this one. This one looks incredible. It's so good. There's 14 hectares. There's a swimming pool. Doesn't need a roof. It'll be okay. Like, it's incredible. And the reality is, it's like that one behind me. Windows are missing. It doesn't actually have a roof. That one's all plastic. The lawn needs a good mow at least. But what do I find so exciting about it? What is so beautiful about that chateau? It's the future. It's the potential. Imagine what it will be. It's incredible. It is faith. It's a vision. I have a vision of what those chateaus could look like, of what my life would be like, sat in the French sun with my own little vineyard. It's lovely. When God says to Joshua, he says, "See, can you see it? Can you see the vision? Do you have the faith?" And so for us now, what does God say? If we were doing it in a similar way to the way it's written here in Joshua, I think it'd be interesting because we could say, look around us. We live in a world that has rejected God. We live in a church, and we're in a church where we are broken people together. We're called by God, but that means we're going to rub each other up the wrong way. All of us carry our own hurts and our own scars. life can be hard. Life is hard. It doesn't work out how we think it will. Is the church what we hope she'd be, or is it just painful? And then, Revelation 21, verse 3. Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost, from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. This is like a rally cry for the church, for us. Look at what the church will be. Look what Jesus has done for her. Can you see it? Can you get hold of the vision? This is why people are passionate. This is why people give up their lives for it, because the church is beautiful. Because Jesus has done it. Because this is what he's making us. And that means that now, right now, things aren't going to be perfect. Things aren't going to be right. There's going to be things that seem impossible, too big. But look, see, have we got the faith? Can we see the beauty in what God has done and what God is doing and what he will do? He is the victor. A bit of a spoiler alert for the rest of Joshua, but Jericho falls, okay? God's won the battle already. And that's for us too. God is the victor. He has won. It's him we're clinging on to. It's his plan we are following. It is him who has our loyalty. We look to him to do it. It's not about God coming in and attaching himself to our life. Do we see his vision? Do we see his plan? Are we running for him? I loved Emmanuel's prayer at the beginning. That unifying prayer for the church. Great. That's where we want to be as a people. We want to be pushing towards what God has got for us. Even though it's not always as we think it should be. Even though there might be other people in the church who think completely different things. But we're joined together as his people. This is what God has won. Jesus dying on that cross bought for himself a nation and a people. It's no longer about one people. It's about all peoples united together in this beautiful thing. That is us. It's crazy, isn't it? But it's great. Let's pray. Let's pray.